You believe abundance is being withheld from you. It is not. What you call lack is often not the absence of opportunity, intelligence, or possibility. It is the presence of inward resistance. And this resistance does not always appear as fear. Sometimes it appears as hesitation, sometimes as delay, sometimes as criticism, sometimes as the quiet refusal to receive what you claim you desire. You say you want a larger life, but when the larger life begins to approach, something within you contracts. You imagine the barrier is outside you: money, circumstance, other people, the market, your past, your education, your family, your luck. But there is a more subtle barrier. It stands before all action. It colors all desire. It interrupts all decision. It is emotional resistance. And until you understand it, you may continue to pursue abundance while secretly defending yourself from it. If you value understanding the structure behind your own mind, subscribe. These conversations are not isolated. They build. Now observe yourself closely. You may think you are open to abundance, but are you open to the internal condition abundance requires? There is a difference. Many desire the result. Few can endure the state of mind that permits the result. You may desire more wealth, more influence, more freedom, more opportunity. But the moment these things demand a different identity from you, resistance appears, not dramatically, quietly. You delay the message. You avoid the decision. You postpone the work. You doubt the offer. You criticize the path. You become tired at the exact moment movement is required. And then you call this realism. But it is not realism. It is emotional resistance disguising itself as judgment. This is the first thing to see. The mind does not resist abundance directly. It resists the feeling of becoming someone who can receive it. That is why the same person may ask for change and sabotage the conditions of change. He wants the harvest, but he resists the plowing. He wants the wider room, but he resists leaving the narrow one. He wants the new life, but he remains loyal to the emotional habits of the old life. Atkinson understood that thought is not a decoration of life. Thought is a force, but thought alone does not rule while emotion contradicts it. You may affirm abundance with the lips, while the deeper mind says this is unsafe. You may speak of success while inwardly expecting punishment for standing out. You may claim freedom while emotionally clinging to limitation because limitation is familiar, and familiarity has a strange authority over the untrained mind. The familiar pain is often preferred to the unfamiliar good, not because pain is desired, but because the nervous system has learned its shape. This is why emotional resistance is so powerful. It does not argue loudly. It simply makes the next step feel wrong. You begin to move, and a pressure rises, a heaviness, a tightening, a dull confusion, a sudden need to think more, a sudden need to wait, a sudden feeling that perhaps this is not the right time. And because the feeling is strong, you assume it is wisdom. But feeling is not always wisdom. Often, feeling is memory. Often, feeling is habit. Often, feeling is the old mind defending its old territory. Atkinson wrote of mental habits as things formed by repetition. A thought repeated becomes easier to think. An emotion repeated becomes easier to feel. An action repeated becomes easier to perform. And eventually the person mistakes repetition for truth. This is the hidden mechanism. You are not resisting abundance because abundance is impossible. You are resisting it because your present mental structure was built around another expectation. If lack has been rehearsed long enough, sufficiency feels unnatural. If struggle has been rehearsed long enough, ease feels suspicious. If disappointment has been rehearsed long enough, opportunity feels like a trick. Then abundance comes near, and the mind does not say, "Here is what I asked for." It says, "This does not match the pattern." And the pattern fights to preserve itself. This fight is what you experience as resistance. You may think your problem is discipline. It is not merely discipline. You may think your problem is motivation. It is not merely motivation. A man can be motivated and still resist. He can know what to do and still avoid doing it. He can see the door and still remain seated before it, because the barrier is not intellectual. It is emotional. The intellect may consent while the emotional habit refuses. This is why explanations rarely change a life by themselves. You can understand abundance. You can read about it. You can speak about it. You can even teach it, and still recoil when life asks you to embody it. Because the subconscious mind is not moved by occasional enthusiasm. It is moved by repeated impression. It obeys what has been practiced. And if fear has been practiced, fear becomes law within the person. Not universal law, personal law, a private government of expectation. This is where many people misunderstand the matter. They think abundance must be forced into existence by strain, so they tighten the will. They become harsh with themselves. They try to overpower their resistance. But emotional resistance grows stronger under violent attention. Whatever you fight inwardly, you often feed. The more you say, "I must not be afraid," the more attention you give to fear. The more you say, "I must stop resisting," the more resistance becomes the center of consciousness. Atkinson's method was quieter. Mental transmutation is not a theatrical act. It is the gradual redirection of attention. You do not destroy the old state by staring at it. You starve it by withdrawing nourishment. And what nourishes a mental state? Attention, repetition, emotional agreement. The old pattern asks you to look at it again, to explain it again, to defend it again, to tell the story again, to rehearse why abundance has not come. Each rehearsal strengthens the structure. The mind says, "I am only being honest." But it is not merely being honest. It is engraving the same channel deeper. There is a kind of poverty that begins before money. It begins as an inward contraction toward possibility, a refusal to imagine without immediately correcting the imagination, a refusal to desire without immediately apologizing for the desire, a refusal to receive without calculating the danger of receiving. Such a person may work hard. He may be intelligent, he may be sincere, but inwardly he is divided. One part reaches, another part pulls back. One part says yes, another part prepares for loss. One part prays for increase, another part identifies with insufficiency. This division is expensive, not only in money, in force, in attention, in vitality. A divided mind cannot move with full current. It leaks power through contradiction. And here is the uncomfortable point. Many people do not lack opportunity. They lack internal permission. They have been trained to feel guilty for wanting more. They have been trained to associate increase with danger. They have been trained to believe that struggle is noble and receiving is suspect. They have been trained to distrust their own expansion. So when abundance approaches, they do not meet it with order. They meet it with emotional static. They become nervous, they overthink, they delay, they ask for signs. They seek certainty where only decision can create clarity, and all the while, the opportunity cools. This is not fate, it is mental mechanics. Thought seeks expression, desire seeks movement, will seeks direction. But resistance interrupts the circuit. Imagine a current moving through a wire. The current may be strong, but if resistance is high, the expression is weakened. So it is with the mind. A person may have desire, he may have ideas, he may have capacity, but emotional resistance reduces transmission. The desire does not become action, the idea does not become form, the capacity does not become conduct. And then the person says, "Perhaps I was not meant for abundance." No, he was not yet organized for it. There is a difference. To be organized for abundance is not to shout affirmations. It is to bring thought, feeling, desire, and action into one line. Most people never do this. They think one thing, feel another, say another, do another, expect another, and then wonder why life returns confusion. The outer disorder is often the visible shadow of an inner contradiction. This does not mean circumstances do not matter. They do. But circumstances are not met by a neutral mind. They are met by a conditioned mind. Two people may stand before the same opening. One feels possibility, the other feels threat. The opening is the same. The internal relation to it is different, and that relation determines action. This is why emotional resistance is the true gatekeeper. It decides what you are able to act upon. It decides what you can receive without fleeing. It decides what level of increase you can hold without self-sabotage. A man may say, "Give me abundance," but if abundance requires visibility and he fears being seen, he will resist. If abundance requires responsibility and he associates responsibility with burden, he will resist. If abundance requires receiving help and he associates help with weakness, he will resist. If abundance requires charging more and he associates money with guilt, he will resist. If abundance requires leaving old company and he associates belonging with smallness, he will resist. Not because abundance is absent, because abundance is emotionally misclassified. The mind has placed it in the category of danger. Now we come to the deeper layer. Emotional resistance is not always against the thing itself. It is often against the consequence of having it. You do not only ask, "Can I receive more?" You secretly ask, "Who will I become if I receive more? What will others expect? What will I lose? Who will resent me? What if I fail after rising? What if I succeed and cannot return?" This is why the old self becomes protective. It says, "Stay here. At least here we know the rules." And this is the silent bargain many people make. They exchange abundance for emotional familiarity. They remain where they are not because they love it, but because they know how to be themselves there. If this is helping you see your own patterns more clearly, subscribe. These ideas only become useful through repetition. Now, what is to be done? Not excitement, not frenzy, not desperate grasping. The first act is observation without obedience. When resistance appears, do not immediately believe it. Study it. Where does it arise? At what exact moment? Before action, before receiving, before asking, before being seen, before committing, before finishing. Resistance has a schedule. It appears at the threshold, not at the dream. Dreaming costs little. Receiving costs identity. So resistance often sleeps while you imagine and wakes when you must act. You must learn its timing. Then you must name it accurately. Do not say, "I am blocked." Say, "An old emotional habit is objecting to a larger condition." Do not say, "I cannot." Say, "A trained feeling is presenting itself as inability." Do not say, "This is not for me." Say, "My familiar self is resisting an unfamiliar expansion." This kind of naming matters, because the moment you identify with resistance, it governs you. But the moment you observe it as a movement in the mind, you stand slightly apart from it, and that slight distance is the beginning of command. Atkinson's philosophy constantly returns to directed thought, not scattered thought, not anxious thought, not thought dragged from one fear to another. Directed thought. The mind must be trained to hold a chosen line long enough for the deeper faculties to accept it. This is not done once. It is done repeatedly. You choose the thought of abundance, not as fantasy, but as mental direction. You hold it calmly. You connect it with action. You refuse to dramatize the old fear. You perform the next concrete duty while maintaining the new inner attitude. This is how the pattern is rewritten, not by wishing, by repeated alignment. Suppose you feel resistance when asking for fair payment. The old habit says, "Who are you to ask?" You do not argue for an hour. You do not collapse. You direct the mind. You say inwardly, "Value may be exchanged without guilt." Then you act accordingly, calmly, precisely, again and again. The first time, resistance will remain. The second time, it will still speak. The third time, it may weaken. The 10th time, the nervous system begins to learn a new law. This is not magic. It is formation. The mind becomes accustomed to the path it walks repeatedly. Suppose you resist receiving help. The old habit says, I must do everything alone. You notice the contraction. You do not obey it. You allow help. You remain present. You do not repay instantly out of discomfort. You let receiving become tolerable. Again, the mind learns. Suppose you resist visibility. You hide your work. You delay publishing. You revise endlessly. You tell yourself it is not ready. But beneath the perfectionism is fear of being perceived. So you practice appearing, not recklessly, not loudly, deliberately. You let the work be seen. You survive the feeling. You repeat. And gradually, visibility is no longer coded as danger. This is how abundance becomes possible. Not because the universe suddenly changes its nature, but because you stop rejecting the channels through which increase arrives. You cannot receive through a closed hand. But the hand does not open by being insulted. It opens through trust trained by experience. The same is true of the mind. A resistant mind must be educated, not beaten. There is also a false spirituality that calls resistance detachment. Be careful. True detachment is freedom from compulsion. False detachment is fear of desire. Some people say, I do not care about abundance, when the truth is they are afraid to care. They have suffered disappointment, so they make a philosophy of not wanting. But buried desire does not disappear. It becomes bitterness. It becomes criticism. It becomes quiet resentment toward those who allowed themselves to want. Atkinson placed great importance on desire, not craving, not feverish grasping, desire as directed life force. Desire gives the mind a line of movement. Without desire, will has no object. And without will, desire has no instrument. But emotional resistance corrupts desire. It says, want, but do not move. Move, but do not expect. Expect, but prepare for loss. This mixed command confuses the whole being. A clear desire does not beg. It organizes. It gathers attention. It selects action. It discards lesser impulses. This is why many cannot sustain abundance. They have not paid the price of internal selection. They want more, but they also want every old comfort. They want expansion, but also invisibility. They want wealth, but also the old excuses. They want influence, but also freedom from criticism. They want the result, but not the identity required to hold it. And so resistance becomes the guardian of the old arrangement. Here is the consequence if this remains unseen. Life will not merely stay the same. The resistance will become more intelligent. It will learn your language. If you are spiritual, it will use spiritual reasons. If you are intellectual, it will use analysis. If you are cautious, it will use prudence. If you are ambitious, it will use perfectionism. If you are wounded, it will use protection. The old pattern adapts. It does not always say no. Sometimes it says later. Sometimes it says after one more preparation. Sometimes it says when you feel ready. But readiness, in the emotional sense, often follows action. It does not precede it. You do not wait to feel abundant before practicing abundance. You practice the mental order that can hold abundance. You practice clarity. You practice receiving. You practice decisive movement. You practice clean exchange. You practice attention to opportunity rather than loyalty to injury. And slowly, the inner atmosphere changes. Atkinson would call this mental training. The Kybalion would call it mental transmutation. Modern language may call it conditioning. The name is secondary. The mechanism is the same. The mind becomes what it repeatedly entertains, feels, and enacts. Therefore, abundance is not merely something you attract. It is something you cease resisting. And this cessation is not passive. It is disciplined. You must stop feeding the emotional states that contradict your declared desire. You must stop rehearsing lack as identity. You must stop treating fear as prophecy. You must stop confusing discomfort with danger. You must stop demanding that the new life feel like the old one. It will not. That is why it is new. There will be a moment when increase feels unfamiliar. Do not retreat. There will be a moment when receiving feels undeserved. Do not build a doctrine around that feeling. There will be a moment when opportunity makes you anxious. Do not call anxiety intuition too quickly. Study it. Ask, is this danger or is this expansion crossing the boundary of my old self? Many doors are missed because the old self trembles before them, and yet the trembling was never a command. It was only a sensation. The trained mind learns to move without waiting for every sensation to agree. This is command, not domination of life. Command of attention, command of interpretation, command of inner consent. You do not need to feel perfectly worthy before you act. You need to stop practicing unworthiness as a religion. You do not need to eliminate all fear before receiving. You need to stop handing fear the authority of law. You do not need to become someone else. You need to stop defending the version of yourself built around lack. That version may have protected you once. It may have helped you survive. It may have given shape to confusion, but what protects in one season may imprison in another. The shell that guards the seed becomes the barrier to the tree. And this is the final recognition. Your resistance is not proof that abundance is absent. It is proof that abundance has reached the boundary of your present identity. That boundary is where the work begins. Not in fantasy, not in panic, not in self-accusation, in steady mental redirection, in repeated constructive thought, in action that teaches the emotions a new expectation, in refusing to let the past define what feels possible, in bringing desire, will, attention, and conduct into one line. Abundance is not admitted by the mind that merely wants. It is admitted by the mind that no longer contracts against receiving. Most people attempt to increase their possessions. Few examine the emotional habits that reject increase. Most people attempt to control their actions. Few ever examine what is controlling their attention.